All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I wanted to say thanks to Nancy. You're right. We did meet online, but not on a dating app, I assure you. She heard what I was doing and she reached out and we thought we would get together, and we've met a few times. She's invited me to Picton, and I'll get into this community a little bit more, but it's one of the most beautiful, and I did not hesitate to say I would be here. And she mentioned my partner. We're not in life partner, but we're business partners. Sometimes, though, I'll tell you, Susan Troupe is a former member of Parliament for London. I'm a former MPP, as you know. And when we started this business, because I was always leaving Ottawa to be in Toronto, and she was always leaving London to be in Ottawa, and someone asked her husband, Walter. He said, well, what are you going to do with Lisa? It was Susan on the road with Lisa all the time. He said, well, Joe, which is my husband, and I are accustomed to a certain way of life, so we have no problem with it. So they were happy that we were going back on the road. So it's great to have her as well. And I have to say, Bob Bird, it's wonderful to see you. It's wonderful to see him. And I'll tell you why. I served what I call a hot minute with his grandson. Because as you know, Tyler was elected in a by-election, and Todd Smith is actually one of my closest friends. And Tyler won, and he became a member of the legislature. And I decided not to run, and I decided I was going to retire on my 50th birthday. I held out to the end of the election. I told the Premier I would do that, but I said I'm going to leave on my 50th birthday, which was October 29th. So he had just taken his seat within a week, I think. And I gave a speech about the legislature and how important that building was, and how it stands amid no matter what. The War of 1812, they stole our mace, we got it back. The legislature has had people from all across this province, as we know, through many, many years. We've had people like Bob Runciman, and we've had people like Greg Cervera, and we have people like Peter Cormos, larger than life. And so many times throughout the years, it's the fresh breath of air that brings people new in. So I talked about that. I talked about all the people I had the privilege of serving. Most of them were funny stories. And I concluded with the fact that as I leave as a 20-year veteran, it was nice to see a young man like Tyler take his seat. And so I congratulate him through you of the fine service that this community has known for decades. And centuries, in fact. So it's wonderful to see you. Now, Nancy did say to me there is no talk about politics, but I don't think that was partisan stuff. That was just local stuff. She told me I can't speak about religion, and I said, no problem about that, but don't tell my mother. And then she said, she didn't say anything about sports, but I figured after we finished O Canada, I better not yell out, go Sens go, because I have a feeling we might be in Leafs territory. But it's all great. And again, and I want to say thanks to JJ. I know you do a lot of great work. And when he banged that bell, and it was to start the meeting, Susan leaned over to me and she said, that means you have to stop dancing now. Because I was like, oh. Anyway, so look, I know that when we first got started, I think it was Grant that asked me what I was going to speak about. I said, I have no idea. I'm a maritimer. A story's going to come out. I promise it will be good, but I don't know what the topic is. So I'm a young lady that, not a young lady anymore, but I was a young lady 25, 26 years ago that left Nova Scotia to believe it right after university. I had $200 in my pocket. I had just graduated from St. Francis Xavier University, and I told my mom and my dad that I wanted to go to live in Ottawa. And they didn't want me to go, and they didn't think I would make it. And so they said, you could stay on your friend's couch for a couple of weeks. And anyway, all these years later, I'm still here. And I had the awesome privilege after moving to Ontario 5 years later, having the privilege to serve the people of Nepean, Carleton, and the city of Ottawa in the legislature. And so it was good. And as I've been on this journey in post-politics, in post-government, and traveling the province, it reminds me of when I was younger and seeing the possibilities and the opportunities that we have without the varnished set of eyes that we have at the legislature. And I came across recently an amazing quote. And I'm going to say it first, and I'm going to tell you who said it. It said, I'm proud of myself, ain't I? And if I'm proud of myself, I'm a proud Canadian. Stompin' Tom Connors. And I thought, how much would we be in debt to him today if he were still here, or a Gord Downey, who through music was able to bring us closer together from coast to coast to coast to coast. We only have 3 coasts, but you know, we'll pretend you guys have a coast as well. But it was amazing because it also got me to think about our first prime minister who spent a lot of time here, Sir John A. Macdonald, who said, let us be English, let us be French, but above all, let us be Canadian. And then you go one step further. Today, our prime minister elbows up. And I thought about these 3 quotes. Pride, resilience, and a fight that just won't quit. That's the Canada I love. That's the Canada that we stand up for, and that's the Canada that we promote. It's not too different than what the Rotary Club stands up for, the good things in life, friendship, for principles. And when I was talking earlier to Arnold, he told me about a town in Uganda that you have been helping. You first started building a school. And now the Ugandan government has used that as a project in order to expand that. And I can tell you, in places where learning is fragile, in countries around the world that are developing, when you give children, especially young women, the opportunity to thrive, well, that is a legacy because they will continue to pass that on. I've had the opportunity since leaving my previous job to teach at McGill as well. And I'm right now teaching women from Kenya who are serving in their parliament for the first time. And the first class, it was interesting. I was teaching them how to deal with their mental health and to balance things. And the stories they told me were quite horrific. And by the second class, when we were talking about public speaking, it was what happens when women get together and we talk about our work lives. It becomes a therapy session. So no matter where we are in the world, we all sort of have the same values and goals, and that is to improve life. And that's what the Rotary Club does. That's what service clubs do. And I'm reminded of a quote by Margaret Mead, who said that all that is required in the world to achieve things is people who are committed and good to doing value to their community. And that's what you're doing. And I love the fact that you're continuing to contribute. So I want to thank you for that. I had an opportunity to speak with Peter just before this, and we had the conversation that we were just talking about with him wanting to monetize history here. And I want to touch on that a bit because it's absolutely critically important that we do not underestimate the heritage, sport, tourism, and culture industries in this country. I'll tell you something. In Ontario, when we had our pandemic, 24 of the 28 hardest hit sectors fell under my portfolio. And people had no idea that when those sectors were hit, how many jobs would be lost and how impactful that was going to be on our economy. You want to know why? Because heritage, sport, tourism, and culture industries in Ontario alone is a $75 billion suite of sectors. That's larger than agriculture, mining, and forestry put together, and it's larger than the GDP of Manitoba. Can you believe that? That is your local playhouse. It's your local sports organization. It's your local winery. It is your local restaurant. It's your local hotel. They actually have more heft than a lot of other industries in this country. Speaking of our country, if we look at it across the country, from BC to Newfoundland, through the territories, $205 billion. That is a critical opportunity for all of us in this country. And that's why when Donald Trump initiated the trade war against our country, Susan and I decided we were going to create something called Secord strategies. Does anyone know what the name Secord stand for? Well, thank God, because if I speak to a younger audience, they say chocolate. we decided we were going to go with the name Secord Strategies because Laura Secord became the first heroine in our history. Before Canada was even created, she made sure that our country remained sovereign and independent from the United States in 1813, walking 30 kilometers in the dark and through mud to make sure that the Indigenous and British soldiers knew what the Americans were doing. And we thought, never has there been another moment in our history where Canadian women can stand up and each of us be those heroines. And so we created Secord Strategies. And in fact, we were fortunate to actually launch our company at her homestead with her great-great-granddaughter. And we took a symbolic walk. And we talked about the importance of Canadian women. And if I wowed you with the stats of heritage, sport, tourism, and culture, well, guys, I'm glad you're sitting down. Because if we're to actually get out of this trade war with a fighting chance, we have a $1.3 trillion secret weapon in this country. Canadian women over the age of 50. Yeah, this is you're gonna all be shocked, all you married men here, because actually, you're not going to be shocked. You're going to be my biggest proof points, because women in Canada over the age of 50 are responsible for $1.3 trillion. I said it with a T, in economic spending. That is a force to be reckoned with. I guarantee we are responsible for 80% of household spending, 90% of the trips that we spend. That is incredibly important. As Canadian women over 50, we're responsible for the brands, ballots, budgets, bookings, and we're also responsible for our bodies, whether that is mental health and wellness and the retreats that are coming online, or the sovereignty that's not quite there in other parts of the world. So we're an actual demographic that has become powerful. So one of the things Susan and I decided we would do is take our experience from government. I was minister responsible for women, but also heritage, sport, tourism, and culture. She was my chief of staff at heritage, sport, tourism, and culture, and in her own right was the parliamentary secretary to Rona Ambrose at the status of women. So we thought, let's take that knowledge and empower women. And in Peter's words, and we're still hoping so are the husbands that we monetize it, but we thought that there was a business model there and a business case. Because we're not a beer and chicken wing crowd anymore. We used to go out with our husbands and that's what we would do. Right now, we would like to go for the wine and cheese. We might like our vacation to not be camping in the woods. We may want to glamp. I would prefer that. And when we go out to dinner, we're more apt to say to the hostess or the waitress or whomever, well, we'd actually prefer this. And I have a 20-year-old daughter. She's a server. And she told me a couple of weeks ago, she goes, Mom, I can't stand when people like you come in. And I'm not going to pay your insurance this month. And I said, why, hon? She said, because. She goes, I had 4 women the same age as you come in tonight, and they all said they were going to have the same thing. I said, well, how's that hard? Because they modified everything. And, you know, it is that intersection of where we are today. We're the first generation to live without a cell phone and with a cell phone, with Facebook, without Facebook, dealing with the glass ceiling and then just actually building our own home. We've been more independent than ever before in the history of the world. Of course, we're a growing demographic. And of course, we're intentional with how we spend our money. Of course, we're intentional in how we put our budgets together. Of course, we're intentional in how we decide to take our families and our friends on vacation. These are all things that are important to us, and it's important that we start to talk about that. And so we also started talking about something else. And it goes back to not only this patriotism of our country, but also the repatriation of Canadian dollars from the United States. And by the way, if we just take $20 billion back from tourism in the United States, that is a $3 billion opportunity for Canada. That's not small. That's why you can monetize what you're doing here, is because Canadians care and they're staying at home. And it's going to take a long while before they go back. But the other thing is, if you're from Europe and you want to go to North America with the safe experience, lower dollar, and a skilled and diverse workforce, you get the North American experience here. So we got to be looking at that opportunity. But it goes also to the fact that in every community across Canada, and I say it's maybe a bit different in some of the bigger cities, but in the smaller communities, and I would consider this one, it's not tiny, don't get me wrong, it's a good size, where you still have the pride of people. You're still very proud of one another and the accomplishments of the people here because you know one another. You're proud of the place that you live in. You're loyalist. You talk about that. You're on the water. You've got beautiful landscape. You've got great architecture. You have incredible history. You have vineyards that people come from all over the country to visit. And then you've got wonderful products. That's your wine. It's your clothing. But I'm going to tell you something else. When I think of Picton, I think the pride of product is actually its people and its place. And I think if you start to monetize that and you think about that, you're going to do very, very well. And I think that every Canadian community, that goes back to that, their basics, the people and where they're from, it's important. Recently, Susan and I had the opportunity to go to Annapolis Royal. And do you know what Annapolis Royal is famous for? It is the first European settlement in North America outside of a place in Florida. It was settled by the French, who later became the Acadians, who were later part of a genocide, the expulsion of the Acadians. They're a very vibrant community now. They would not have survived without the Mi'kmaq, which was our Mi'kmaq. And the two cultures are completely intertwined. And so you can actually go to that settlement, which, by the way, every single member of their town council is a female, as is their town crier. And they have really relied on their history. They've relied on their culture, their arts, and through that they have tourism. What they also have is something Picton has. And it's something that I see in every community that I've gone to. Hospitality. And hospitality isn't just serving somebody with a tray and giving them their tea. It's not just when somebody's going to your hotel where they come in. Hospitality is kindness and sense of belonging. And I'll tell you another place where I found a sense of belonging. Susan and I had the opportunity to go to Moose Factory. Anybody here ever been to Moose Factory? We had an opportunity. It's amazing. We dipped our toes in the Arctic at James Bay. In fact, there was one crazy taxi driver, what was it, the water taxi? I go, hey, can I ride your taxi, your water taxi? He goes, sure. Like, I've never ever driven a boat before, but he let me drive the taxi because apparently there's no rules there. But what was really incredible is we met a woman who will be a friend for life. Her name is Kim Chichu, a strong Indigenous woman, and she took us for lunch with the elders, and they allowed us to make bannock. I thought was interesting about bannock, it was very much similar to Acadian bread. And so on the East Coast, right on the Bay of Fundy that goes into the Atlantic Ocean, the bread was very similar to the bread Northern Ontario that goes into the Arctic. Isn't that funny? Sometimes the things we think were so different and we're not. Anyway, Kim was wonderful. And she took us to different things in different places. It's a small island, of course. But she took us into the Hudson Bay Company, the first place where the staff worked. And we saw artifacts and antiques that were hundreds of years old. And believe it or not, weren't guarded by any government. You just touch books and drawings and plaques. And I thought that was interesting because also it's part of our complicated history. One that people are managing to deal with. In each of these cases, whether it's Picton or Annapolis or up in Moose Factory, there has been a coexistence of the Indigenous peoples with those who've come to settle here. And in many cases, it was them who allowed our ancestors to live another day. sometimes these are topics that are very difficult to broach, but I look at Canada through a sense of optimism and eyes of hope. And I do truthfully believe in recognition and reconciliation. And I believe that we can do that through heritage, sport, tourism, and culture. And I believe we can do that through love of our country. And I believe we can do that because we're proud to be Canadian. And that's why I'm here. When I left my job of 20 years, 6 terms in the Ontario legislature, reaching highest offices, and obviously because it's politics, your lowest of lows in life, I decided one day I want to invent the job I want. And I invented the job of making sure I could spread what I'm proud of. And that's my country and me. And when I look around this room today, it's not just people. It's not just service members. The people around this room are contributors to a community. And because of that, you're leaders. And you'll have a legacy. And you are going to make that legacy last for centuries to come. And I'm going to close on this because I know it's not easy. Because volunteers are hard to come by. And the same 20% of people do all of the work. And we always get worried. What's the next generation going to do? Are they going to stand up and contribute? Is this going to fall to the wayside? Now, let me tell you, we have resilient youth in this country as well. They may be having a little bit of trouble finding their way. The pandemic was very difficult on them. But I have to say, I know for a fact, working with them and hiring them and, living with one of them, and I mean, she's worried about the housing crisis. So she tells me all the time she's gonna be homeless. I'm like, no, you can live in your room forever. I'll pay for everything. Yeah. But you all know, but you know what I mean. But I can't thank you enough because I know the work in Uganda is important. But being here today is a strong sign of solidarity with your neighbors, your local municipally elected, federally and provincially elected politicians. You're showing vibrancy and strength in your institutions, and you're carrying something forward. And just have hope that that next generation will follow through. And don't underestimate the young women. Don't underestimate the people who are contributing, because again, as I said, I talk a lot more about the women that are wandering. And by the way, Grant was like, what do I do with a wandering woman? I said, oh, it's like I said, you just give her a cup of tea. Didn't I? Hey, I think you were trying to joke, but I was like, oh, I'm not touching that one. But, I think that there's a great opportunity here. Not just in Picton, but everywhere. And I think in every crisis that we need to find the opportunity. And right now with Canadian pride running so high, this is your moment. This is your opportunity. And I sincerely wish you the best of success. And I know that you're going to have great success based on how many people are in this room. But I really do. I wish you well. Now I'm going to address one final thing, because 6 people came up to me about these cards. And they said, what are all these things on the side? So if you look at my name, Lisa McLeod, or Susan's, but I have a few more because I'm on few more channels. The little round thing, the globe, that's the internet. So if you want to find us, we're at secordstrategies.ca. The X sign is what I still call Twitter, but X. You may not want to check me out on X because that's where I have my guilty pleasures of telling everybody in the world off, because I couldn't do that for 20 years. The next one with the little, yeah, you're laughing, eh? But it's so true. The little one with the camera is Instagram. The IN is not Instagram, it's LinkedIn. The little funny music sign there is TikTok. That's actually where I found my quote from Stomp and Tom. That was a great quote too, by the way, wasn't it? And then the little, I don't know what that is at the end, that's YouTube. So if you want to watch Lisa McLeod's speeches for the next 15 days, I got content on there for you. Now, with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you very much, and I'll conclude with go Sens go. So listen, happy to take any questions. I'm a former politician, so questions don't necessarily mean answers because it ain't answer period.